It was 1944. World War II was still going strong, but in the small town of Mattoon, Illinois, a different kind of terror was starting. It wasn't about bombs or faraway battles. This fear was close, right at home. It was about gas. A mysterious gas that seemed to appear from nowhere. The first reports were kind of strange. Not everyone believed them at first. People hear things, right? Sometimes it's just imagination. But then more reports came, and more. And soon, the whole town felt a chill. It started with a woman named Aline Kearney. It was late on August 30th. She woke up because of a strange smell. A sweet, sickening smell, she said. It made her feel bad. She tried to move, but her legs felt like rubber. She couldn't get up. Her throat was burning. Her mouth felt like it was paralyzed. She tried to scream for her husband, but no sound came out. She was completely freaked out. Her husband, Urban Kearney, was sleeping in the next room. He heard a noise, maybe her struggling. He came in and found her barely able to breathe. He smelled it too, that weird sweet smell. He thought maybe it was just gas from the house, a leak or something. He looked around but didn't find anything. They opened the windows. Aline slowly started to feel better. They called the police. The police officer, a man named Metzger, came to their house. He looked around. He couldn't find anything out of place. No broken windows, no forced entries. Nothing. He smelled a faint odor, but it wasn't strong enough to make him sick. He just told them to keep the windows open and be careful. He probably thought it was an isolated incident. Maybe some bad food, maybe a strange draft. You know how it is, but it wasn't isolated. Not at all. The next day, September 1st, another call came in. This time it was Mr. and Mrs. Harry B. Faulkner. They lived on a different street. Mrs. Faulkner was sitting by an open window. She smelled a sickly sweet odor too. She felt a tingling in her legs and feet. She felt like she was going to throw up. She thought it was perfume at first, but then it got worse. She felt paralyzed too. She called her husband. He came in and smelled it. He felt dizzy. He felt a burning in his mouth. They were both feeling pretty bad. Mr. Faulkner went outside to look around. He saw a man hiding by a window, peeking in. The man was tall, thin, and dressed in dark clothes. He ran away when Mr. Faulkner saw him. That's when things got really weird. They called the police too. The police came again. This time they took the reports more seriously. 2 similar attacks in 2 days. 2 different parts of town. The description of the gas was the same. The symptoms were the same: paralysis, nausea, burning throat. And now, a possible sighting of a person. A phantom man. Word started to spread, slowly at first. Mattoon was a small town. Everyone knew everyone. News traveled fast, even without the internet or instant messaging. People talked over fences, at the grocery store, after church. A gas attacker in Mattoon. It sounded crazy. It sounded like something out of a Pulp Fiction story. But the fear was real for the people who experienced it. Aline Kearney and the Faulkners weren't making it up. Their symptoms were real. Their fear was real. The police, though still unsure what they were dealing with, knew they had to be careful. They started to think maybe someone was deliberately doing this. Someone was spraying gas into people's homes. But why? And with what? The initial attacks were just the beginning. They were like the first drops of rain before a storm. The people of Mattoon didn't know it yet, but a wave of fear was about to wash over their quiet town. A fear of something unseen, something that could creep into your home while you slept, something that could take your breath away. Of a phantom, an unknown attacker, and it was just getting started. The police had no real clues. No real evidence of the gas itself, just the victims' accounts and their own faint detection of the smell. They didn't find a gas mask, a spray device, or anything else that could explain it. They patrolled the streets more often. They told people to keep their windows closed even though it was summer. But that didn't help much against a determined attacker, if there even was an attacker. That was the big question. Was it a real person or something else? The idea of a phantom gasser began to take root. A name for the fear, even if there was no face to go with it. The first few attacks were just the start. After the reports from the Kearneys and the Faulkners, the whole town started to get edgy. People talked. They whispered. Was there really someone out there spraying gas? It felt like something out of a bad movie, but it was happening in their town, Mattoon. Then, more reports came in. On September 2nd, a woman named Miss Florence Southern reported a similar attack. She was sitting in her home when she smelled the peculiar sweet odor. She felt a burning in her mouth and throat. Her legs became numb. She was alone, so she called her neighbor, who then called the police. Again, no clear evidence, just the smell, the symptoms, and it just kept happening. Over the next few days, more people called the police. The descriptions of the gas were always the same: sweet, sickening, like perfume, but much worse. The symptoms were consistent to nausea, burning sensations, often temporary paralysis or numbness in the legs. Many victims described waking up to the smell or noticing it suddenly while relaxing in their homes. The police were swamped, they had no idea what to do, they patrolled the streets day and night, they looked for anyone suspicious. But the attacker, if there was one, was like a ghost. Many victims reported seeing a shadowy figure outside their windows or running away, always too far to get a good look, always too fast to catch. Some said the person was tall and thin, others described a woman. The descriptions were inconsistent, adding to the confusion. The newspapers got wind of it, of course, local papers first, then bigger ones. Mad Gasser of Mattoon strikes again, the headlines screamed. That's where the name Mad Gasser came from. It stuck. It made the whole thing sound even more terrifying, more deliberate. It wasn't just a random act, it was a mad person doing it. This media attention, as you can imagine, made things worse. It didn't just inform people, it fed the fear. Every strange smell, every unexplained dizzy spell suddenly became an attack. People became hyper-aware. They started to interpret normal things as signs of the gasser. The smell of a flower, the car exhaust, someone cooking something strong, all could be mistaken for the mysterious gas. Doors were locked. Windows were kept shut, even in the warm summer nights. People slept with clubs or guns next to their beds. Some families even moved their mattresses into their basements, thinking it would be safer from someone spraying gas through a window. The entire town was on edge. Everyone was looking over their shoulder. Every shadow was suspect. One evening, a woman called the police in a panic. She said she saw the gasser. She described a figure trying to get into her house. The police rushed there. They searched the area. They found nothing. It was probably just her fear making her see things in the dark. But that didn't make her fear any less real. People started to report things that weren't even attacks. They'd smell something, feel a bit off, and immediately think it was the gasser. It spread like a disease, this fear. Mass hysteria, some would call it later. But at the time, to the people living it, it was very, very real. The police even started to check out some of the victims' stories more closely. They found some inconsistencies. Some stories sounded a bit too dramatic, but how do you tell if someone is truly attacked or just panicking? It was a hard line to draw. The officers were overwhelmed with calls, many of them probably false alarms born of fear. The mayor of Mattoon got involved. He pleaded for calm. He asked people to be vigilant but not to panic. He even called in help from the state police. More officers came to town. They set up patrols. They tried to reassure people. But it was tough when the enemy was unseen, unknown, and seemingly everywhere. The lack of any real physical evidence was frustrating. No gas canisters, no discarded sprayers, no footprints that led to anything. Just the accounts, the smells, the strange symptoms. It felt like they were chasing a ghost. As a really nasty, gassy ghost. The community tried to pull together, but fear can be isolating. People started to eye their neighbors with suspicion. Could it be someone they knew? Someone playing a sick joke? Or was it truly a madman stalking the streets of Mattoon? No one knew. And that not knowing was the worst part of all. The town was paralyzed, not just by the gas, but by the fear it created. With the panic at its peak, the police were under immense pressure. Everyone wanted answers. Everyone wanted the mad gasser caught. But catching someone you can't see, someone who leaves no real trace, is incredibly hard. The police launched a full-scale investigation. They interviewed every victim in detail. They revisited the crime scenes, if you could even call them that, again and again. They looked for anything. A footprint, a dropped item, a witness who saw something concrete. Nothing. They had a few theories, of course. Maybe it was a prankster, a really sick, dangerous prankster. But what kind of gas could cause such symptoms, and why? Others thought it might be someone with a grudge, targeting specific people. But the attack seemed random, spread out across town. The idea of a phantom attacker was also discussed. Someone who appeared and disappeared, leaving only fear behind. This added to the mystery and the terror. It wasn't just a person, it was almost a mythic figure now. One early theory was that it was a woman. Some victims, though not many, had described a woman, a tall woman often. This theory didn't get much traction, as most of the more detailed descriptions pointed to a man. But the police had to consider everything. The most common description, though vague, was of a tall, thin man in dark clothes. Some said he wore a cap, others said he was carrying something, maybe a sprayer. But these were fleeting glimpses, often in the dark, often by people who were already terrified and disoriented. How reliable could these reports be? That was a question the police struggled with. They followed up on every lead, every suspicious person reported by a nervous citizen, every car seen driving slowly down a street. Mattoon became a town full of amateur detectives, and a town full of false alarms. One night, a local watchman, a man named Carl Deal, was on patrol. He reported seeing a man in a dark car. The car sped off. Dial fired shots at the car. Police responded quickly. They found no damaged car, no person, no evidence. Deal was convinced he saw something, but it led nowhere. This showed how jumpy everyone was, including those tasked with protecting the town. The police even tried to analyze the gas, or what little traces of it they could find. Some samples were sent to labs. They hoped for a chemical signature, something to identify the substance. But the results were always inconclusive. Either there was too little gas left, or the gas was something common and harmless, like a household cleaner or a pesticide. This lack of a clear chemical identity was a major hurdle. A common theory that emerged, especially among outsiders, was that the whole thing was mass hysteria. That the fear itself was causing people to imagine the smells and symptoms. People get scared, their minds play tricks on them. They read newspaper reports, and their symptoms match what they expect. It's a powerful psychological phenomenon. But how do you tell someone who genuinely feels sick that it's all in their head? It's not fair, and it doesn't make the symptoms go away for them. The Mattoon police chief, a man named C.E. Cole, was overwhelmed. He openly admitted that his department was at a loss. They had no real suspects, no weapon, no motive. He was criticized for not solving the case, but what could he do with no evidence? The federal government even got involved briefly. The FBI looked into it, they interviewed people, they reviewed the reports. But they too came up empty. They eventually suggested that the incidents were likely caused by a combination of factors, a local situation, possibly a prank, exaggerated by the excited imaginations of the victims and rumor-ridden public. This was a polite way of saying mass hysteria, but the local people didn't want to hear that. They wanted a real person, a real culprit. They needed someone to blame. The idea that their own minds were tricking them was almost more unsettling than a gas attacker. It made them feel vulnerable in a different way. There were other theories too. Maybe it was a chemical plant leak, but no nearby plant reported any issues, and the gas seemed to target specific homes, not entire neighborhoods. Maybe it was a group of people, a gang, but again, no evidence. The search for the gasser was frustrating, chaotic, and ultimately fruitless. The police tried their best, working tirelessly, but they were chasing shadows. The fear was real, the symptoms were real for those who experienced them, but the source remained elusive. It was a complete mystery, and the longer it went on without an arrest, the more unsettling it became for Mattoon. The town was left to wonder if the gasser would ever be caught, or if he would simply disappear as mysteriously as he arrived. As the attacks continued, something shifted. The sheer number of reports started to raise questions, not just from outside observers, but within Mattoon itself. Doubts began to creep in. The first few attacks, like the Kearneys and the Faulkners, seemed very distinct. The symptoms were strong, the fear palpable, but then, as the panic spread, the reports started to change. Some were still serious, but many others seemed less convincing. For example, a person would call the police saying they smelled the gas, but then they'd feel fine a few minutes later. Or they'd report seeing a shadowy figure, but couldn't describe anything specific. The symptoms often became less severe, less paralyzing. Sometimes people would report feeling dizzy after simply reading a newspaper headline about the gasser. This inconsistency made the police's job even harder. How do you sort out the genuine attacks from the false alarms? It became nearly impossible. They couldn't dismiss every claim, because what if a real attack was happening? But they couldn't investigate every single one with the same intensity. Psychologists and sociologists started to weigh in, even from a distance. They pointed to the classic signs of mass hysteria. It's not that people are lying. It's that their fear is so intense, their minds start to create the symptoms they expect. The power of suggestion is very strong. If you're constantly told there's a sickening, paralyzing gas in town, and you smell any strange odor, your body might react as if it's that gas. You might feel dizzy, nauseous, or even experience temporary paralysis. It's a real physical reaction, but it's triggered by psychological stress, not an external chemical agent. The media played a big role here. While they initially helped spread the word and highlight the danger, their constant reporting also amplified the fear. Every new incident became front-page news, fueling the collective anxiety. People became convinced that they were next. Consider the timing, too. It was 1944. There was a war going on. People were already stressed. There was a shortage of police due to men being overseas. Nerves were frayed. This existing tension might have made the town more susceptible to such a phenomenon. The police started to look for more rational explanations for the symptoms. Could it be a harmless gas leak? A new type of pesticide being used in the area, some industrial chemical. They investigated all these angles. But they never found a single consistent, innocent source that could explain all the reports. And the biggest piece of doubt, the lack of physical evidence. If a mad gasser was truly spraying a potent gas into dozens of homes, wouldn't there be something left behind? In a canister? A strong residue? Chemical burns on fabrics? The labs couldn't identify any toxic gas. This was a huge problem for the real gasser theory. Some police officers and officials began to quietly suggest that a real attacker might have initiated the first few incidents, but that the vast majority of subsequent reports were due to fear and imagination. This theory tried to bridge the gap between believing the initial victims and explaining the later, less substantiated ones. It allowed for the possibility of a real threat while acknowledging the powerful role of psychology. The number of attacks, which had spiked dramatically in early September, started to decline by mid-September. As people started to question the phenomenon, as more rational explanations were suggested, the reports became less frequent. This pattern is also typical of mass hysteria events. Once the collective focus and anxiety start to fade, the symptoms also diminish. The initial fear of the unknown began to give way to a more nuanced understanding, at least for some. It wasn't about dismissing people's experiences, but about understanding the complex interplay between fear, suggestion, and physical sensation. The people of Mattoon weren't lying, but they might have been experiencing something more complicated than just a simple gas attack. The town was slowly moving from blind terror to a reluctant acceptance that the truth might be more psychological than criminal. Just as mysteriously as it began, the mad gasser of Mattoon phenomenon faded away. By mid-September 1944, the reports of gas attacks had dropped significantly. A few isolated incidents were reported in October, but they lacked the intensity and widespread panic of the early days. And then it just stopped. The mad gasser was gone, there was no grand capture, no dramatic reveal of the culprit, no trial. The case was never officially solved in the traditional sense. The police chief, C.E. Cole, and others eventually concluded that the initial few attacks might have been real, perhaps a prank gone wrong, but that the vast majority of the incidents were a result of mass hysteria. The official statement from the FBI, after their brief involvement, echoed this sentiment. They couldn't find any evidence of a real attacker or a toxic gas. They suggested that some of the occurrences might be traced to pranksters, and in other instances, to the victims' vivid imaginations. It was a cautious way of saying, we don't think there's a serial gasser. For the people of Mattoon, this explanation was hard to swallow for many. How could all those terrifying experiences, those real physical symptoms, just be imagination? It felt dismissive. Many victims continued to believe they were truly attacked by a physical assailant, and that the police just failed to catch him. But for others, the idea of mass hysteria provided a kind of closure, even if it wasn't a satisfying one. It meant that the town wasn't under threat from a maniacal gasser anymore, even if it meant confronting the power of collective fear. What exactly happened in Mattoon? We still don't have a definitive answer, and probably never will. The most commonly accepted theory today is a combination of factors. First, a few genuine, though perhaps not super serious, incidents. Maybe someone was indeed spraying a non-lethal, irritating chemical like a tear gas or something similar. Or it could have been a simple gas leak, or even carbon monoxide poisoning, which can cause dizziness and nausea. These initial events sparked fear. Second, this fear was amplified by the media. The sensational headlines, the constant reporting, it all put the town on high alert. Third, the prevailing wartime anxiety and stress made people more susceptible to suggestion and panic. Fourth, a powerful wave of mass hysteria took over. People started to interpret normal smells and sensations as gas attacks. Their fear caused real physical symptoms, even without an external chemical agent. The mad gasser of Mattoon became a classic case study in social psychology. It's often taught as an example of how quickly and powerfully mass hysteria can grip a community. It shows how easily fear can spread, and how difficult it is to separate fact from perception when everyone is on edge. The legacy of the mad gasser from Mattoon itself is complex. For a long time, the town probably just wanted to forget about it. It was a strange, embarrassing, and terrifying episode, but over the years it's also become a part of their history, a unique story that sets Mattoon apart. It's a reminder of a time when their quiet town was gripped by an invisible terror. Today, you won't find monuments to the mad gasser in Mattoon. It's not something they celebrate. But the story persists. It's a cautionary tale about fear and rumor. It asks us to consider how we react when faced with the unknown and how powerful our own minds can be in shaping our reality. The identity of the Mad Gasser remains a mystery. Was it a real person, a prankster who started something far bigger than they intended? Was it a series of unrelated incidents, misinterpreted and sensationalized, or was it mostly the collective imagination of a terrified town? We'll never know for sure. The phantom anesthesiologist terrorized Mattoon, yes, but perhaps the biggest terror was the one created within the minds of its own citizens. It's a strange, compelling, and unsettling piece of history that continues to intrigue us decades later.